Good afternoon. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Milius family and Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church, I welcome all of you to this service of remembrance and celebration of the life of Pauline Milius. After today's service, there will be a memorial reception where the family will greet you in the lounge, which is to the back of this sanctuary, where we can continue to remember Polly and all that she meant to us. In respect of our time together, I'd like to request that if you have cell phones or other electronic devices, to please place them on worship mode. Thank you. If this is your first time in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we want you to know that we are part of the congregational Protestant lineage of Christian churches, but that more than a century ago, we decided that we would rather build our religious community on the promises we make and keep with one another, rather than on uniformity of belief. And so as a non-creedal religious community, we honor religious and spiritual wisdom and truth wherever we find it, in the great religious traditions of the world and in our hearts, in nature. And when we grieve, we use our memorial services as occasions to celebrate the life of our loved one, rather than as an occasion to proselytize. We honor the fact that each of us here has brought our own spiritual understanding of the mysteries of life and death and the interval in between, and that we will find consolation in those understandings as we work our way through our common loss. We know very well that death is an inevitable part of our lives, and we know, as we learn to love one another, that eventually our love will include loss and grief. Because no matter how lucky we are in our lives, no matter how long we live, saying goodbye will come to each and every one of us. But all of our knowing doesn't make it any easier. The final farewells always come as a loss for which we somehow feel ourselves unprepared. But while death has brought us together this afternoon, life has gathered us too. Life channeled through Polly's life. And love, life's greatest expression, which survives even death, has gathered us today. Our love for Bob, Sally, and their families, who once again must say goodbye to a life so intimately intertwined with their own. Our love for George, Polly's longtime beloved companion, and our love for Polly, whose kindness, compassion, generosity of spirit, unconditional love, and chutzpah touched us and moved us to be better people. We can never hope to speak to all aspects and achievements of Polly's life this afternoon, but what we share will deepen and enrich our understanding of her as a person. And in doing so, we celebrate the life that she lived, the loves that she cherished, the beauty that she created, the causes that she supported, and the values that she embodied. In this way, we hope to inspire each one of us to do the same. Our best gift to one another today, and our best tribute to Polly Milius, both now and in the future, is to hold her in our hearts, in our memories, as completely as possible, and through our memories, stories, and love, to give her back to one another again and again. And so, in that spirit, we gather, summoned by respect and affection to demonstrate our love for both the living and the departed, We gather to comfort one another, for we have suffered a great loss. We gather to celebrate together, for we have been blessed by a life well lived. With love and gratitude, we gather. We open this sacred time with the lighting of the candles. The flame we light is an ancient symbol of transformation and also a symbol of the light that passes from generation to generation. All the items that you see on this beautiful altar table are all from Polly's home. And so now, as Sasha Milius kindles the candles in memory of Polly, I invite us to rise in body or in spirit to speak the words printed in your order of service. Let us say together, we kindle a flame of sharing. Let's say together the words in your order of celebration. We kindle a flame of sharing, the flame of ongoing life. In this time of remembrance, when we search for understanding and meaning, we light this sign of our quest for truth, hope, and community. Thank you. You may be seated.
May we pray. May today there be peace within. May you trust God that you are exactly where you are meant to be. May you not forget the infinite possibilities that are born of faith. May you use these gifts that you have received and pass on the love that has been given to you. Amen.
This is a poem called Instructions by Arnold Crompton. When I have moved beyond you in the adventure of life, gather in some pleasant place and there remember me with spoken words old and new. Let a tear fall, if you will, but let a smile come quickly, for I have loved the laughter of life. Do not linger too long with your solemnities. Go eat and talk, and when you can, follow a woodland trail, climb a high mountain, walk along the wild seashore, chew the thoughts of some book which challenges your soul. Use your hands some bright day to make a thing of beauty or to lift someone's heavy load. Though you mention not my name, though no thought of me crosses your mind, I shall be with you. For these have been the realities of my life for me. And when you face some crisis with anguish, when you walk alone with courage, when you choose your path of right, I shall be very close to you. I have followed the valleys, I have climbed the heights of life.
By chance, and we would like to share it with you. the words are, "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." Amen.
Thank you all for coming to celebrate Mom's life together on this beautiful day. I'm here to tell you my mother's story. First, a handful of facts. Pauline Ernst Hamilton was born May 15, 1941. Her high school friend Katie called her Pauline Emancipation Hamilton. She grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. She had one sister, Ellen, 2 years her senior. She dreaded ballet class and piano lessons. She rejoiced when she discovered tennis in middle school. She was an avid stamp collector. She began college at Worcester in Ohio, but transferred to Barnard after a year. She met Peter Milius at an evening of bridge, arranged by mutual family friends, and both were in love by the end of the evening. Her mother was ill for most of her childhood and died in February of 1963. 1963 was also the year that Polly graduated from Barnard and married Peter Milius. In 1964, Polly and Peter moved to Connecticut so Polly could pursue a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship at Yale. An old friend, Bill Grider, said recently of them, Polly was the first feminist he ever met. Peter was the second. After her graduation, they moved to D.C. for Peter's work, a 40-year career at the Washington Post. They had 2 children, Bob in 1968, me in 1970. Polly's father died the next year, 1971. She worked as a social worker and then as a research assistant at the Brookings Institution. And in 1975, when her youngest started kindergarten, Polly enrolled at Georgetown Law School. She clerked for 2 years at the U.S. District Court and then spent 30 in the Environment and Natural Resources Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. In 1996, both of her children married. Polly and Peter loved being grandparents. Polly battled breast cancer in 2000. Peter died unexpectedly in 2002. Polly retired in 2010. She spent the next years with her beloved George Helmuth, volunteering, enjoying family, caring for friends, and traveling. Her sister Ellen died in August 2016 after an excruciating struggle with dementia. Polly was diagnosed with leukemia the next day. Polly died on April 12, 2019, in her home on Rittenhouse Street, where she'd lived for nearly half a century. Next, her lineage, or a sample of the people who shaped her. Mom's namesake was her paternal grandmother, Pauline Ernst. She and her husband were medical missionaries in China, where Mom's father, Joseph Earl Hamilton, was born and raised. From them, Mom gained a staunch work ethic and a practicality that bordered on the absurd. Mom's father added to that a deep love of nature and the outdoors. Her mother, Mary, was independent and sharp-witted, committed to caring for those around her and to treating all beings with dignity and respect. She was an intellectual Catholic who read Thomas Merton and whose sister, Aunt Sally, for whom I was named, was a Sacred Heart nun. Her illness was the foundation of her own, and no doubt Mom's, resilience. Lydia Edwards, or Big Lydia, for whom my daughter is named, was Mom's mother's first cousin. She was a doctor, had introduced Mom's parents, and in some ways served as a surrogate for both. She was the foundation of Mom's dogma-free feminism. She was one of 6 women in her class at Johns Hopkins Medical School in 1928. When I asked her once if she remembered facing any discrimination, she said, "Oh, no." And then she qualified her response. She said there was one professor who she felt had come down overly harsh about her poor spelling. So, there were, of course, many others, some close to her, Dad, Martha Durthick, Carrie Booker, and George, and other looming figures like Judge Parker, for whom she clerked after law school. He was a powerful intellect with high standards. As kids, when we scrambled to make excuses for why we were late or had not met expectations, Mom would give us a deadpan glare and suggest we tell it to the judge. Her abodes, or some of her dwelling places. In Louisville, the Hamiltons lived first on the compound of the VA hospital, where her father was a surgeon, and then in a modest home on Hillside Lane. They spent summers on remote St. Joseph's Island in Canada. They had a few temporary homes before settling at 3224 Rittenhouse Street in D.C. in 1972, the home where she died 47 years later. Mom's time and her heart were split between Rittenhouse Street and a farm on Mountain Road in Fulton County, Pennsylvania, where she and Peter purchased in 1978, the year she graduated from law school. The property includes a farmhouse, barn and shed, and 241 acres, 2/3 of which are a wooded section of a humble mountain called Sidling Hill. Sidling Hill was their antidote to Capitol Hill, a refuge of sanity and calm, a buffer for our nuclear family, and a way for Mom to reconstruct the family that she lost when her parents died. They purchased the property with 2 others, Martha Durthick, a dear friend from Brookings, and an honorary sibling to both of them, and Lydia Edwards, who I described previously, who was the matriarch of our clan. Sidling Hill also provided a continuous stream of top-quality stray cats and dogs, that some of you enjoy today, and most of all, A community where common sense and being a good neighbor are the order of the day. Since her death, I have returned to this sanctuary, the woods of Seidling Hill, and the many, many miles of trails in Rock Creek Park, which Mom and George and Misha and Brooklyn the dog explored together. I was looking for Mom there, trying to make sense of her story. Wandering in the woods, I started noticing the upturned, spiraling roots of felled trees, powerful whirls of growth and adaptation. That was Mom, the solid foundation, the nurturer, the quiet support behind the scenes. Looking closely, I could identify where the roots had grown around stones, or sometimes straight through them, overcoming obstacles, forging new paths, making so much other growth possible. I liked this metaphor. A bit sentimental, but apt. I saw her in the bases of trees all around, taking a myriad of forms. I passed by a particularly dramatic one. The base was a vortex of roots spinning in every direction. In my peripheral vision, they appeared to move, and my mind was drawn to Durga, the 10-armed Hindu goddess, AKA the invincible, created for the slaying of a demon the other gods couldn't manage. Durga is the principal goddess, the mother and nurturer, and she also happens to wield a different weapon in each of her many hands. The encyclopedia says she's both derivative from the male divinities and the true source of their inner power. She's also greater than any of them. When I told Bob about this revelation, he accused me of interpreting. But George knows it's true. And Dad was certainly well aware. He called Mom the leader of the free world. That's Durga, just couched in Cold War journalism speak. Mom knew best of all, but like most things, made space for us to figure it out for ourselves. Though she was not one to display pictures of herself around the house, in her bedroom is a framed photo of her as a baby, with a crazy mop of hair, chubby cheeks, and an expression of clarity and resolve. When she was struggling through leukemia, Mom drew strength from the determination on that little face, trusting that Durga, AKA Pauline Emancipation Hamilton, was there inside her and would find the way through. Thank you.
Sure, it's going to be hard to follow that. But I'm going to read a letter today that Peter wrote about Polly right after they met. And I guess I'm about the age that Peter was, so I'm kind of in his place. And when my mom told me that I was going to be reading this, all I could think about was that I didn't really get to know Peter. And so all I know about him is how much he loved Polly. That's kind of like the basis of everything. So here's the letter. A little about Polly, whom I hope someday you can meet. She is a fierce pest because she doesn't understand the joy of being slovenly, and I haven't been able to convert her. She beats me unmercilessly at gin rummy, is a good tennis player, and an excellent cook. She graduated last June from Barnard in American history and will go to graduate school either in that or Russian literature next September on a Woodrow Wilson grant she won and got delivered for a year. Her hair is long, but she is short. Her home is Louisville, but her heart is in New England, or maybe just New York. 4 nights ago, she passed with 10 points after I opened 3 No Trump with 27. But the weekend before that, I watched a pro football game when she wanted to go horseback riding, so we're even. She has a delightful sense of humor, and I hope she keeps it if she reads this.
I'm going to get through this. You've heard many wonderful things about Polly, and I'm glad that you're here today to help celebrate her 78th birthday and to grieve that she's not here with us, her special and treasured friends. We are going to celebrate her special life and friendship and family today with some of the special things that she collected throughout her life. These treasures are here, her orchids, the candlesticks and statues, all sitting on top of a quilt that she treasures. It's a setting for the many remarks and memories we have of and with her. I met Polly in the 7th grade in the bus parking lot of the junior high school we attended in Louisville, Kentucky, where we had both been born. Our fathers were both doctors, so our parents were friends, and Polly and I became lifelong friends from that parking lot encounter. We shared many life experiences together, wonderful and sorrowful. Her mother died in February 1963, and my father died in July 1963, and they are now buried 2 plots apart in the Cave Hill Cemetery in Louisville. Sorry. Her mother's birthday is May 19th, which is also my birthday. Her parents were loving role models for Polly. Her mother was very kind and helpful to people who needed special care and love. And her father was Scottish and frugal, and I think that influenced Polly, which explains why she refused to pay for parking, no matter how far away a free parking space was from her destination. Along the way in high school, we graduated in May 1959, the largest graduating class, 400, in the state of Kentucky up to that year. Her mother was gravely ill at that time, so we practiced 2 ways, one step to the left and one to the right, depending on whether Polly would be attending the graduation. Her mother rallied, and Polly attended graduation. In the yearbook, under her senior year is the phrase, "To know her is to love her," which is amazingly accurate, especially compared to the other sayings under other senior pictures. She was a star in high school, belonging to the National Honor Society, the Latin Club, French Club, and a National Merit semifinalist. And she was selected to be a hostess for the senior class college day, and selected for honor tasks such as usher at graduation day as a junior and usher at National Honor Society initiation. These were positions I never heard of. Senior high also meant bridge, and you heard about Polly and Peter playing bridge. Well, we all loved and played bridge during lunch hours, and we continued up until recently. Polly and I went off to college together. We were freshman roommates at the College of Worcester in Ohio. For her, a continuation of her father's and sister's paths. Her father was born to a Presbyterian minister in China and came to the U.S. to attend the College of Worcester, a Presbyterian school. But Polly wanted a different college experience, so she went to Barnard, New York City for her sophomore year, leaving me all alone. After another year, I transferred to American University here in Washington, so we were again able to visit back and forth. Graduation came. She married Peter in Louisville that fall, where I had moved back after my father's death, so we continued our journey together. And then later, we both moved to Washington after she finished her graduate work at Yale, when Peter got a job at the Washington Post. So we continued to share our lives and experiences. She was the one I went to for advice and comfort when needed. She always had a kind, logical suggestion for whatever was troubling me. An example was how to toilet train our daughter, who was then and still is younger than Bob and Sally. So Polly said, while bribes are not the best way to train children, in the case of toilet training, it's allowed. 1 M&M for pee-pee and 2 for poo. And it worked. When we visited Daryl's father, who loved candy, our daughter saw a big bowl of M&Ms on the coffee table and loudly said, "Grandpa must go to the bathroom a lot." So now for additional comments from her friends.
Hello. I'm speaking today as Polly's former colleague and dear friend, but I know I also speak for the many current and former PLSL attorneys and staff, the Environment Division leadership, and for other DOJ colleagues who were honored to work with Polly and are saddened by her loss. Walk into her office. Polly would be sitting there, thinking and probably writing. Her desk was neat and orderly, her files meticulously kept. You would see plenty of legal treatises and books and binders, but also reflections of what was most important to her: her family, her love of South Louisiana and Cajun music, her farm in Pennsylvania, and of course, tennis. In some ways, like a judge, Polly would listen and dispense wisdom. Those of us in the policy section would often engage in what one attorney called the Polly hover, a group of us standing outside her office, each waiting their turn to talk with her, so she could advise and direct on the issue at hand. Justice was the right department for Polly, and the Environment Division was the right place to focus her legal mind. She started in 1980 and spent 13 years as a litigator, establishing herself as a sharp-minded and tough advocate. In 1993, Polly was chosen by then Assistant Attorney General Lois Schiffer to be Section Chief of PLSL, now called LPS, which was the policy section. After litigating, PLSL was different. Polly learned to live in a world where legal, policy, and political considerations were continuously intertwined, sometimes in unexpected ways. She navigated the section through 3 administrations and 8 congressional terms, and she supervised attorneys and advised top leadership on an enormous range of issues, from wetlands to international treaties, to Fifth Amendment takings, Native American rights, ocean protection, and too many more to mention. Her close friend and General Lit colleague, David Shuey, recently said that he thought that as PLSL chief, Polly became her most complete self professionally. Our legal discussions with Polly were fun and educational. At the same time, she was intellectually demanding and a stickler for details. And I would say she did not suffer fools gladly. Now, there are many ways to not suffer fools gladly. Polly's was polite and Southern. She would ask the most piercing questions, but in a very quiet way, making you wish you'd thought a bit more before spouting an opinion. And although she was always available to problem solve, she did not appreciate unnecessarily long conversations and would, at some point, indicate her interest in ending the conversation by simply saying, "Very good." It was time to go. Polly knew how to get things done without ever being turfy or self-aggrandizing. By harnessing her own skills and those of her attorneys and staff, she played an indispensable part in moving forward the work and the mission of the Environment and Natural Resources Division. As a manager, she had a light touch, stepping in to help each attorney or staff person develop in his or her own way. She supported her colleagues and her employees through illness and hard times, and she gave her full attention to others, even as she herself faced daunting health challenges and indescribable personal loss. She was a keen observer of people. We saw this in her knack for giving gifts, nothing fancy, just appropriate to the person. One attorney, Justin Smith, once got a toy box from her that when you opened it said, "Let me out!" Perfect for someone Polly knew was often impatient with meetings. And that was the heart of Polly, her generosity. She cared about people above all. As a friend, she wanted to hear everything about your life. She had a devilish sense of humor, and she thought a lot of things were funny, so you wanted to make her laugh. And in return, Polly never stopped being a cheerleader for those she loved. It's occurred to me that the quality in Polly that this all points to is constancy. She knew herself, she had a laser focus on her priorities and what was meaningful in her life, and she never lost sight of those things. And that brings me to one final thought, which John Cruden, another former Assistant Attorney General, recently used to describe Polly. It's from Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. For those of us who worked with her, we knew she believed our work and our mission were important and worthwhile. And for those of us lucky to have been her friends, we feel understood and enriched. Thank you.
I was just thinking when I was listening to the last wonderful talk that there was one fool that Polly suffered. Anyhow, my topic is adventuring with Polly. And on trips that we took, and we took a lot, Polly was always very determined, confident, and almost always right. And whenever we had disagreements, I finally learned to listen, because when I did, we always had a wonderful time. Of course, we had a wonderful time when I didn't listen too, but anyway. About 8 years ago, en route to a wedding at the University of Arkansas, Polly and I visited Petit Jean State Park atop Petit Jean Mountain, which rises 1,000 feet above the Arkansas River Valley and is in my beloved Ozarks. Arriving just in time for lunch, we spent the day after lunch driving around looking at some of the sites, such as the Winthrop Rockefeller Car Museum. We looked at the big waterfall there, and we looked at the vistas. And then as the afternoon waned and the sun was already starting to set a little bit, Polly announced we needed to take a more substantial hike as opposed to the walks to the waterfall and around the museum. But my inclination was to head back to the park lounge for a pre-dinner nap. After consulting the park brochure, Polly determined that we should drive to the trailhead for the Seven Hollows Trail. It was late afternoon when we parked at the trailhead. I didn't have to look at the posted sign to point out to Polly that with darkness maybe 90 minutes away, it was very late for a hike into unknown rough territory. I observed if we got stranded in early fall in our shirt sleeves, it could be a cold night. And further reading of the park brochure ominously described the trail as a 4.5-mile loop. It followed 4 of 7 hollows, so the name was misleading, and along ridges between the hollows, crossing numerous creeks with an elevation change of nearly 400 feet. The brochure rated the trail as a vigorous hike. Cautious as usual, I suggested to Polly that starting such a hike with inadequate remaining daylight was foolish and possibly dangerous. Clearly, other hikers weren't out so late because there were no other cars in the parking lot. Polly let me know she was going and that I could wait in the car if I wanted. This was a Polly tactic not unfamiliar to me. The hike turned out to be spectacular. It's one of the nicest hikes I ever took. It had waterfalls, a natural bridge, crystal clear streams, and bluffs with caves. Sometimes we hiked through dense woods with pine, hemlock, hardwoods, and sometimes in creek beds, or on barren rock shelves or meadows. Polly fully enjoyed all the scenery while I hurried us along, keeping careful track of the trailblazes, which were every half mile, and rejoicing at each one of them. As the sun was setting, we passed the 4-mile marker and made it to the car. Polly was gracious to me in my defeat. Polly's determination, confidence, and decision-making clearly shaped her marvelous career, and I miss her very much.
So nothing I'm going to say will fully convey to you, and hopefully, of course, you all know this, but the fierce focus of her attention, the gentle warmth of her listening, and the clear rigor of her brain. But please do keep these traits in your heart as I tell my brief story. Bob and Sally have asked me to speak about their mother's role as the lighthouse of our family, as her North Star, if you will. I think the idea was that a second cousin, once removed, had the exact right amount of distance to keep her eye firmly fixed on the leader of the pack. If you spent time with Polly, as you know, you spent time with her doing something. And it turned out that was true, even if what you were doing was watching television. You didn't simply watch with Polly, you also caught up while she ferociously TiVo'd her way through commercials. She and I both loved a show called The Good Wife. It was a legal drama based on the literal trials and tribulations of a Chicago-based law firm. And this worked well for us because I don't have a TV, and she could watch while doing two things at once, see the show and have a good gossip. So the one time I remember most clearly was a hot July evening. It was late. She had scheduled me in after a tennis session. And we were tired, and we were hungry, and shockingly, there was no food in the house. So she said, Garrett, just go through the vegetable bin, and I will make a salad. I was like, fine. So the first thing I find are these lettuce leaves wrapped cumbersomely in a dish towel. They were a little wilted, and I kind of handed them to her, and she's like, oh, thank God, I have those. Those are so fresh. I was like, okay. And I found a red pepper, and I handed it over and said, there's some brown spots. And she said, you know, you're very wasteful. There was a lot of pepper there. And so when I gave her the cucumber, I didn't even mention the mushy bits at all. She chopped everything up, and she put in some of those, slivered blanched almonds she'd gotten a year or so ago for Thanksgiving. And then we added some dried red things that had either been cherries or cranberries at some point. We were not sure. And I got the bottle of sherry and the glasses, and we went upstairs to watch. And I think we loved the show because the women wore these extraordinary clothes as they stalked up and down the hallways of their office. And Polly every week would say to me, the law in this episode is very unlikely. It's enjoyable, but it's unlikely. And as I was driving home that night, I thought, weird, that was like the best salad of my life. And when I think about her role as our family's leader, I know that was her gift to us, that together we are more splendid than we are in our parts. Which is why I'm so glad we're all here to say to her, Polly, we miss you, but thank you for loving us, for bringing us together, and for the great gift of family salad.
Hello, everyone. When my father died 17 years ago, my mom saw a wise hospice counselor who told her that grief is like moving between two places in the pouring rain. The only way to do it is to go right through the center, right through the eye of the storm, and not to try to hug the edges in order to stay dry. She took that advice to heart. And as you might expect, she was downright methodical in how she approached her grieving after his death. As I've reflected on my dad's death and now recently on my mom's, I've had that image of the rain in my head. And it's occurred to me that it's an apt metaphor, not only for how she grieved, but also how she lived. And maybe in the end, this is her most enduring gift, to me at least, and that's understanding that getting wet is not really what you avoid, but it's what you seek in everything that you do in your life. This principle guided many of my mom's relationships with her friends. She wanted everyone in her orbit to be as immersed in their own lives as she was in her own, whether it be tennis or Ollie courses or book groups or theater or whatever else. She had ideas and plans for just about everyone. Some were simple, but many of them were elaborate and complex projects. In another life, she might have been a matchmaker or some sort of event planner, or as Garrett has suggested, maybe a general. This had some lovely consequences. When we were growing up and spending time at the farm in Pennsylvania, my parents set up Ward Sinclair and Cass Peterson. These were two of my father's old colleagues from the Post. They eventually became a couple. They bought an old property in Fulton County, and they both quit the Post to become organic farmers. In a book about that experience, Cass Peterson wrote, "It wasn't our idea to buy a farm. It was Peter Milius's idea. No, it was probably Polly Milius's idea." That was definitely my mother, for sure. As we grew up, we watched Mom provide support to people around us, and we were often her unwitting agents. We were dispatched to deliver gifts to neighbors or prepare cards or drawings for relatives and friends that we didn't know very well. When I was young, we had one neighbor who didn't have much money, and Mom had me cut their grass without getting paid for a couple of years. As kids, we didn't question these commitments. This was just how things were done. To me now, as an adult, the logic is more clear. For Mom, the idea of community engagement was not something you did once a month on a Sunday, but was more just part of her ordinary everyday life. And she gave her heart to this. As to the yard work, she certainly practiced what she preached, as many of you know. She cut her own grass and shoveled her own walk right up to just about the end of her life. As her kids, Sally and I experienced her spirit in spades. Mom was the engine of our family. She was always concocting opportunities for us, but from the sidelines and giving us plenty of space to be independent and to find our own way, and rarely sweating the small stuff. She wanted us to lead balanced lives, to learn languages, to get some culture, play music, be socially engaged. In both the literal and the figurative sense, she really shaped who her kids became and what her family looked like. I remember when I was about 12, we went to a wedding with a bagpiper playing. A month later, I started taking lessons myself in bagpiping, and in high school, I was part of the Washington Scottish Pipe Band. I don't need to say whose idea it was for me to start playing the bagpipes, and it's a wonderful twist that Matt Caldell, who was my teacher way back when, is here piping for us today. Mom's involvement in her kids' lives didn't stop when we left the house. It was a lifelong job. Until the end, she was pushing me to do more, including to start singing again. A few weeks before she died, when her mobility was more challenged, I was pleading with her to use a real shower stool. The one that she had, which won't surprise any of you, was an old broken wooden stool from the basement that she had put a plastic bag over and put in the shower. And as I pled with her to use the real one, she looked at me and she said, "I'll use the new one when you join a singing group." And I know from her expression that she was only half kidding, or maybe even a little less than half kidding. My point with all this isn't to ramble on about my sister and myself. What I mean to say is that with her friends and especially her family, she had a real vision of what a rich and full life ought to look like. And she was committed and driven to enrich the lives of everyone around her. And I think there's maybe a theme that we all see emerging here today. In her own life, Mom was the embodiment of all of these principles. She had no patience for idleness, and for the most part, she couldn't sit still. Those of you who enjoyed the pleasure of watching tennis with her on TV know that she religiously fast-forwarded through all the advertisements. Watching ads was wasted time, and she wanted none of it. Thinking back to my father's passing, what has struck me the most in hindsight about my mother was how she transitioned from the initial grief into a very deliberate and focused process of rebuilding her own life, which so many of you here have been a big part of, especially George. She reordered and restructured to make things work with her new circumstances. I remember her saying to me that no matter how hard it might get, the key was that you pull yourself out of bed every day and put one foot in front of the other. It's all pretty basic stuff, but it's so much easier said than done. After her illness was diagnosed about 3 years ago, she didn't wallow, but she again made adjustments to again create a full life for herself. I learned so much from watching her do this. All the way into the last week of her life, she knew what she wanted to do, to see the cherry blossoms, to visit with friends, to sit with Misha on the deck having a Chinese food picnic. Mom's focus on getting the most out of life was not limited to big picture philosophical stuff, but applied to the mundane as well. She reused tinfoil and plastic wrap over and over. She never threw out cards or envelopes. And as Garrett hinted earlier, when we looked at sell-by dates in her kitchen, we didn't focus on months and days. We focused more on what decade things were from. But I think there was some sane reasoning behind all of this. Her upbringing and her own ethic told her that you needed to get the most out of everything, whether that be your life or whether that be old plastic containers. During most of my 50-year life, she owned exactly 3 cars, and only reluctantly did she very recently give up her beloved 1998 Avalon to buy a 4th car after someone sideswiped her and insurance would not pay for the repairs. She was torn to give up that old car as she clearly thought it had plenty of gas left in the tank, so to speak. Waste nothing and make sure your footprint on the planet is light and delicate. That is how she lived. Before she died, my mom told us that she wished that after she was gone, she could have one more day to throw out the medicine and the hospital supplies and just sit on her deck and admire the flowering trees and the blooming geraniums. Well, true to her spirit, Sally did manage to recycle a lot of the medicines, and the house is now clear of her illness, but it's certainly not clear of her spirit, which endures at Rittenhouse Street and endures in many of us, certainly in me. It's a nice thought to imagine that while we all sit here today on this beautiful sunny spring day, Mom is back out on her deck. Surely she's wearing her red New Jersey Nets visor, lying on a chair under the old oaks and scratching her sweet cat Llewellyn on the chin.
Please rise in body and or in spirit to sing Amazing Grace, number 205 in the gray hymnal. Matt is going to play it through once, and then Jeffrey will come forward and lead us in the singing. may be seated. Irish dramatist and critic George Bernard Shaw wrote, "This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion," he continues, "that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is sort of a splendid torch, which I have got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." From what I have gleaned, listening to Bob and Sally share memories about their mother, as well as the moving reflections that you shared today, I feel Polly's life was no brief candle. It was a splendid torch that burned brightly throughout her life. She brought a strong commitment to life, choosing to live a life of joy, creativity, holy curiosity, radical hospitality, service, and love. Polly was richer in things, wiser in thoughts, generous of heart and hand, kinder in deeds, collaborative in work, courageous in action, more abundant in those qualities of daughter, wife, mother, sister, aunt, companion, friend, colleague that brought love, beauty, and hope to our common world. And though we shall miss her, our grief is soothed by the richness of our living memories and her enduring presence in those she touched. So let us turn inward now with gratitude and thanksgiving. We give thanks for every gift of life that brings us joy, peace, and strength of heart. We give thanks for every person whose life speaks to us words of hope and affirmation. We give thanks especially for Polly, in whose memory we gather here today. We give thanks for her life, each of us recalling what she has meant to us. We give thanks for her love that centered the love of her family for many years. We give thanks for the lessons, gentle and challenging, Polly left with us, and grateful for the example her life was to the world. We remember that it is because we knew, loved, and delighted in Polly that we feel such sorrow at her passing. But our joy comes first. Because of the joy, you feel such sorrow now. May those who mourn Polly's passing be granted the gifts of understanding and acceptance, and may we truly find our sense of thanksgiving, thanksgiving for a good life lived fully and beautifully. And may the love that we have for Polly remain strong and alive in each of us, for we know that love is the bridge that conquers even death. That love that will not let us go, let us down, or let us off the hook. Shall we rise now? I leave you with these words from the Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore. Peace, my heart, let the time of parting be sweet. Let it not be a death, but completeness. Let love melt into memory and pain into song. Let the flight through the sky end in the folding of the wings over the nest. Let the last touch of your hands be gentle, like the flower of the night. Stand still, O beautiful end, for a moment, and say your last words in silence. I bow to you and hold up my lamp to light you on your way. Go in peace, my friends. Go making peace, living gently, loving fiercely, and bowing to the mystery. I invite you to be seated for the postlude, and to let you know that following the reception, there will be a gathering, and I trust it will be a rowdy gathering at 3224 Rittenhouse Street. May it be so.